The battle had been long and brutal. The alien empire had fought a fierce war against its enemies, but the cost was enormous. In the final clash, Princess Vela, the only heir to the throne, had been sent to lead her father's forces. The king, a proud and strong ruler, trusted his daughter with the empire's future. He believed in her strength and skills, but in the heat of battle, disaster struck. Word spread quickly across the galaxy. Princess Vela had fallen. Her ship was destroyed in a deadly ambush, and there was no sign of her body. The king's heart sank. He could not bear the thought of losing his only child, the one who had been groomed to rule beside him. For weeks, the kingdom mourned. Vela's name was spoken in hushed tones, and the king wore his grief like a heavy cloak. The king, once proud and powerful, withdrew into his palace. The halls were silent, filled only with the whispers of courtiers who feared their ruler's anger. He had lost his daughter, and with her, perhaps the hope of saving the empire. The war raged on, and yet something inside the king had died that day. His people looked to him for strength, but he could offer little. His heart was shattered, and the burden of leadership seemed too heavy to carry. Years passed, and the war continued. The king did his best to keep the empire together, but the wounds of battle never healed. He ruled with a quiet sorrow, his decisions clouded by the pain of losing his daughter. The people of the kingdom grew restless. They had seen their king grow weaker with each passing year. The princess's death had cast a shadow over the empire, and many wondered if they would ever see peace again. But in the quiet of his grief, something unexpected happened. A series of reports came in, strange and cryptic messages about a human being seen in the galaxy's outer reaches. The human was said to be traveling with someone who had an uncanny resemblance to the lost Princess Vela. The reports were dismissed as nonsense, nothing more than rumors. The king refused to believe that his daughter could have survived, even though a small part of him held on to that fragile hope. One day, a ship appeared in the skies above the royal palace. The king watched from his balcony as it descended, his heart racing. He had not seen such a sight in years. The ship landed, and to his disbelief, a figure stepped out, Princess Vela. She was alive. But what shocked the king more was the figure standing beside her, a human. The king's mind raced. How could this be? His daughter, whom he had mourned for so long, was standing before him, and she was with a human. What had happened to her in the years she had been missing? And why had she brought a human with her? Jonathan had never imagined that his life would lead him to a distant galaxy, far from Earth. He was just an ordinary man, a soldier who had once dreamed of adventure but had never expected to find it. But fate had a way of changing everything. After a strange encounter with a mysterious alien ship, Jonathan found himself stranded in a world unlike anything he had ever seen. The vastness of space stretched before him, filled with unknown creatures, planets, and dangers. He had no idea how he had ended up here. All he knew was that the universe was full of surprises, and none of them were kind. He was a stranger in an alien world, with no way to get back home. Alone and confused, he wandered through the galaxy, hoping for a chance to survive. Then he met her. Princess Vela was unlike any being Jonathan had ever encountered. She was a warrior, strong and fierce, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of an entire galaxy. At first, she had treated him like a nuisance, a human who didn't belong in this world. But Jonathan, ever the survivor, proved himself useful. He had skills, resourcefulness, and a natural ability to adapt to any situation. Over time, Vela began to see something in him, something more than just a lost human. They became allies. Vela had been through more than Jonathan could comprehend. She had survived the brutal war that tore apart her home, and when she was thought to be dead, she had found a new purpose. A group of aliens had saved her life, taking her in and teaching her their ways. They had trained her for something important, something greater than just ruling an empire. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader, a warrior, and a symbol of hope for her people. Jonathan had been with her through the darkest parts of her journey. He had seen the pain in her eyes, the scars of battle that went far deeper than any physical wound. She had lost everything, her family, her kingdom, and her place in the galaxy. But what Jonathan didn't know was that Vela had never truly given up on returning home. She had always planned to reclaim what was rightfully hers, to bring her people back from the brink of destruction. Now, after years of wandering the stars, they were returning to her home. Vela's heart was filled with a mixture of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of purpose. She had come to accept that her world had changed, and so had she. But she had a human by her side, someone who had not only helped her survive, but had also helped her find herself again. Jonathan, for his part, was still coming to terms with his new reality. He had never imagined he would be so close to an alien princess, let alone be part of her quest to return to a kingdom on the edge of collapse. But he had no choice but to trust her, just as she had trusted him. They were in this together now, bound by their shared experiences and the strange, unspoken bond that had formed between them. As they neared her home planet, Vela's thoughts raced. Would her people accept her? Would her father, the king, recognize the woman she had become? And how would the galaxy react to a human being by her side? There were many questions, but for now, the only thing that mattered was that they had made it this far. The rest would come in time. The journey back to Vela's home planet was long, and as the ship approached the familiar star system, a sense of unease settled over her. The planet that she had once called home seemed distant and foreign now. She had changed so much, and she knew her people would see that. Would they still recognize her as the princess they once adored, or would they see a stranger? Jonathan stood beside her as they looked out at the planet, his presence strangely comforting in this moment of uncertainty. He was a human, out of place in this world, yet he had become her constant companion, her ally. He had stood by her in the darkest times, and now, as they neared her kingdom, he was the one person she could truly trust. Her mind raced as she thought about the king, her father. The last time they had spoken, it was under the shadow of death. She had been sent into battle, and he had believed her to be lost forever. The king had mourned her as if she were a dead memory. Now she was returning with a human by her side, a decision that would likely shake her father to his core. The king had always been a proud ruler, and the idea of his daughter returning with a human was a concept he would find hard to accept. "Are you sure about this?" Jonathan asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Vela turned to him, her gaze steady. "I don't have a choice. My people need me. My father, he needs to see that I'm not the same girl he lost. I'm stronger now. I have to show him that." Jonathan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had seen the transformation in her. The Vela who had left for war was gone. In her place stood a warrior, a leader who had survived the impossible and come back with a mission. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The king was a ruler who valued tradition and strength above all else, and yet Vela knew deep down that he needed to understand the truth of what had happened. He needed to see the woman she had become. The ship entered the planet's atmosphere, and the lights of the royal city gleamed below. It was a sight Vela had once known well, but now it felt so distant. Her heart pounded in her chest as the city grew larger, and she could almost feel the weight of her father's gaze upon her. When the ship landed in the royal courtyard, Vela felt a wave of emotion crash over her. It was the moment of truth. Would the people accept her? Would her father? As the door opened, she stepped out first, her heart heavy with anticipation. Jonathan followed closely behind her. The courtyard was eerily quiet as guards stood at attention, staring at the unfamiliar human. Vela walked with purpose, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of her father. The king was a figure of immense power, and his presence in the palace was always commanding. But Vela wasn't the same woman who had once looked up to him in admiration. She had changed, and so had her destiny. The king's chamber doors swung open, and there he stood, older, grayer, but still the powerful leader of the kingdom. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The shock in his gaze was clear. He had never expected this. His daughter, standing before him, alive, and with a human at her side. Vela stood tall, ready to face whatever would come next. This was no longer just a return. It was the beginning of a new chapter for her, for the kingdom, and for the galaxy itself. The king stood frozen at the entrance to his chambers, his eyes locked onto his daughter. For a moment, he didn't believe what he was seeing. Princess Vela, alive. The shock hit him like a physical blow. His heart, which had long been filled with grief and loss, now struggled to comprehend the impossible. His daughter, who he thought had died in battle years ago, was standing before him, with a human by her side. The last time he had seen her, she was leaving for war, strong and determined, but now she looked so different. She had changed. There was no doubt about it. Her eyes were harder, her posture more confident, and the woman who had once been his princess seemed more like a stranger than his child. The guards in the courtyard, who had watched the arrival of the ship, were now whispering among themselves. The human who accompanied Vela seemed just as out of place as she had been when she first left. The king's gaze shifted from his daughter to Jonathan, a human. The king's kingdom had never had dealings with humans, and the thought of one standing in his palace, especially by his daughter's side, felt unnatural. "Father," Vela's voice was calm, but there was a noticeable tremor in it. She had prepared for this moment, but facing him again was still harder than she expected. "I'm alive. I have come back to you." The king's heart sank even further as he heard her speak. His mind screamed for him to hold onto his anger, to reject the truth he was seeing, but his heart could not ignore her presence. His daughter, alive, yet there was still a lingering disbelief. How could this be? "Vela," the king's voice cracked. His strong, commanding tone faltered. "I thought you were dead. How? How is this possible?" His eyes were wide with confusion. "And this human," he gestured toward Jonathan. "Why is he here with you? What is the meaning of this?" Vela stood tall and met her father's gaze. She knew the questions were coming, but she had expected them. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. Her return would not be simple, and the king's doubts were something she had to face. "I survived the battle," she said softly, but firmly. "I was not the same after that day. I was saved by others who helped me grow stronger. They taught me things I never knew. And this human, Jonathan," she gestured toward him, "has been by my side throughout it all. He helped me survive. And together, we've seen things that have changed us both." Jonathan stepped forward slightly, his presence unthreatening but steady. He could see the king's confusion and skepticism. The ruler of this mighty empire had never met someone like him. But Jonathan wasn't here to challenge the king's authority. He was here because of the bond he had with Vela, and he knew it would be impossible to keep that a secret now. The king's eyes narrowed, still filled with doubt. "You bring a human to my palace, to my court, and expect me to accept him." His tone was sharp, filled with the weight of years of leadership and tradition. "What will your people think of this? What will they say about the woman who returns with a human, claiming to be a survivor of battle?" Vela felt the sting of her father's words. He was right in some ways. Her return was unexpected, and her choices could very well upset the balance of power in the kingdom. But she had made her choice, and she would stand by it. "I'm not the same person I was when I left, Father," Vela said. "And neither is the galaxy. There is much more at stake than tradition or what others might think. I didn't come back to please you or anyone else. I came back to save us. I came back to lead." The king's face remained hard, but inside, he felt the weight of her words. His daughter had returned, and she was not the same as the girl he had sent to war. She was stronger, but it was clear that her return would not be without conflict. He had to decide now. Would he embrace the daughter who had survived against all odds, or would he let his pride and disbelief drive a wedge between them forever. The silence in the room grew heavy, each second stretching out. The king's mind churned, caught between his heart and his duty. Finally, he spoke again, his voice colder but with a hint of uncertainty. "I will hear your explanation," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But I warn you, daughter, this kingdom is not so easily led, and I will not simply accept this human at my side." Vela's heart clenched, but she remained unwavering. This was just the beginning. She had come back for her people, and no matter what her father thought, she would do whatever it took to prove that she was the leader they needed. Jonathan stood quietly by Vela's side as her father's eyes shifted between them. He could feel the tension in the room, a weight that seemed to press down on him from every angle. He wasn't a prince, nor a noble warrior. He was just a human, out of place in the midst of this alien kingdom. And yet, here he was, standing next to Vela, as she tried to convince her father of something he could hardly understand. The king's eyes didn't leave Jonathan as he spoke again, his tone colder now. "You have much to explain, daughter, but this human, this stranger, is not welcome here. How can I trust someone I know nothing about? What is his role in this story you bring to me?" Vela knew the king wasn't just questioning Jonathan's place here, but her judgment as well. The king, a ruler who had spent years in power, believed in strength, tradition, and control. A human, a species he considered weak and insignificant, was the last thing he wanted to accept. But Vela had made her decision, and she wouldn't back down. "He is here because he helped me survive. He fought by my side when no one else would. I owe him my life," Vela said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "We've been through things together that have changed both of us. The galaxy is not what it once was, Father, and this human, Jonathan, is part of the future I am trying to build." Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes meeting the king's without fear, though his hands felt cold. He wasn't a warrior, but he had seen enough to know that his life depended on how he handled this moment. "I don't expect you to accept me immediately," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'd helped your daughter, and she's helped me. I've seen a lot of things in my time here, things that most humans would never imagine. If you want to save your kingdom, you'll have to look beyond your pride and see the bigger picture." The king stared at him for a long moment, the silence between them heavy. Jonathan's words seemed to hang in the air, but the king's face remained unreadable. It was clear that the king did not trust him. Jonathan was an outsider, a foreigner who had no place in this ancient kingdom, but he had made an impact. He had proven himself useful to Vela, and that was enough for her. Finally, the king broke the silence. "You may stay, for now." His voice was sharp, as if he had made a concession he didn't want to. "But do not think that I will accept this easily. You will have to prove your worth, not to me, but to the kingdom." Vela nodded, relieved but knowing this was far from over. Her father had given them a chance, but it was only a chance. There was much work to be done, and the road ahead would be difficult. She had returned to lead, not just her people, but the entire galaxy towards something better, something more united. And Jonathan, despite being an outsider, was a key part of that future. Jonathan wasn't sure what to feel. He had expected a much harsher reception. The king's words weren't kind, but they were better than he had hoped for. Still, he understood the reality. He was an outsider in a kingdom that didn't belong to him, and his stay here would never be without suspicion. As they left the royal chambers, Vela glanced at Jonathan. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "You don't have to be here. You could go back to your own world. But you chose to stay with me." Jonathan smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "I'm not going anywhere. Not until this kingdom gets the help it needs." Vela's eyes softened. She didn't need to say anything more. They both knew that they were in this together, whether the king approved or not. The future of the kingdom, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested in their hands. Vela had barely stepped out of the royal chambers when her mind began to race. Her father's reaction to her return, though not unexpected, had been colder than she imagined. The king's doubt was clear. He didn't trust her yet, and certainly didn't trust Jonathan. Still, they had made it through the first obstacle, but Vela couldn't ignore the growing feeling in her gut that something deeper was at play. There was more to her father's coldness than just pride and tradition. She knew the king well, too well. His harshness was often a shield, but beneath that shield lay something more dangerous. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of the unknown. Fear of change. And Vela had come to realize that it wasn't just the return of a long-lost daughter that troubled him. It was the fact that she had changed, that she had learned things that could shake the very foundation of his rule. Later that day, Vela found herself standing before the royal archives. The massive stone doors creaked open as she entered the dimly lit chamber, its shelves filled with ancient scrolls and records of the kingdom's history. The air smelled of dust and age, a reminder of how long these records had been hidden away. But Vela wasn't interested in the kingdom's history. She was looking for something more personal, the truth behind her father's decisions. As she carefully sifted through the old records, she stumbled upon a collection of papers that caught her eye. The documents were old, faded, and sealed with the royal crest. These were not the public records. These were private. Slowly, Vela opened the documents, her eyes scanning over the words. The more she read, the clearer it became. Her father, the mighty king, had made decisions that had led to the destruction of her people. Vela's heart pounded in her chest as the truth unfolded before her. It wasn't just the war that had driven her to battle. It was her father's own hidden role in starting it. The documents detailed secret alliances, dealings with other empires, and a series of dangerous gambles the king had made without informing his advisors or the people. The war had been a result of his arrogance, and Vela was left to carry the burden of his choices. She felt a cold anger rise within her. Her father had betrayed his people, had sent her to die without even considering the consequences. But there was more. The documents revealed something even darker. The king had known she wasn't dead. He had known for years. The plan to let the war rage on, the plan to keep her death a secret. It was all part of a larger scheme to protect his power. He had sacrificed his daughter for the sake of the empire. Vela slammed the papers down, her breath coming in short, angry bursts. How could he do this to her? How could he have let her believe she was dead, all for the sake of his own pride and control? Her whole life had been built on lies. As she stood there, the door behind her creaked open, and she spun around to find Jonathan standing in the doorway. His face was filled with concern, but he didn't speak right away. He could see the rage in her eyes, the pain she was trying to hide. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. Vela's voice trembled as she spoke, her anger barely contained. "My father, he's the reason for everything. The war, my death. It was all his doing. He sacrificed me for his own gain." Jonathan stepped forward, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He didn't need to say anything. He could see that the weight of what she had just discovered was overwhelming her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Vela took a deep breath and wiped the tears from her eyes. "I've always known my father was ruthless, but I didn't think he would go this far. I thought I was fighting for something. But now I know I was just a pawn in his game." Jonathan nodded, his expression grim. "You're not just a pawn. You're the future of this kingdom. And you're not alone. We'll make sure the truth comes out. You're not going to fight this battle alone anymore." Vela looked up at him, the weight of everything settling in. She had come back to take her place as the ruler of the kingdom. But now, she realized, her real battle wasn't just with enemies outside her walls. It was with her own father, and the truth of what he had done. Vela's mind raced as she stood in the royal chambers, the truth of her father's actions weighing heavily on her shoulders. The anger inside her was like a fire, burning brighter with each passing moment. The man who had once been her hero, the king who had raised her, was now nothing more than a traitor in her eyes. She had been sent into battle, believed dead for years, all because of his greed and desire for power. And now, he was standing in the way of the future she wanted to build, not just for herself, but for the entire kingdom. The king had betrayed her, and in turn, he had betrayed the entire kingdom. Vela had thought for so long that her return was about reclaiming her birthright, but now she understood that it was about much more than that. She wasn't just here to take her place as ruler. She was here to make sure her people, her kingdom, and her family would no longer suffer under the rule of a man who cared only for his own control. Jonathan stood beside her, sensing the shift in her demeanor. He could see the change in her. Vela was no longer the grieving daughter who had returned from battle. She was becoming something else. She was becoming a leader, someone who would stop at nothing to free her kingdom from the shackles of her father's mistakes. "Vela," Jonathan said softly, his voice steady and comforting. "What are you planning to do?" Vela turned to him, her eyes sharp and focused. "I'm going to take what's mine," she said with a quiet intensity. "I'm going to take back my kingdom and show my father the consequences of his actions." Jonathan nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about justice. Vela had every right to be angry, but this wasn't just about personal betrayal. The future of her people was at stake, and she would not let her father's arrogance destroy everything they had fought for. The first step in her plan was to gather support. The king had ruled with fear for far too long, and Vela knew that the time had come for the people to rise up. She could not do this alone. She needed allies, strong, loyal people who would stand by her side, even against the king. Vela and Jonathan spent the next few days meeting with key figures in the kingdom, speaking to trusted generals, advisors, and leaders. They traveled to distant villages and cities, speaking to the common people who had suffered under the king's rule. Slowly, word spread of Vela's return, and whispers of rebellion began to grow louder. The people had long been afraid to speak out, but with Vela back, they saw a chance to finally change the system. In the midst of all this, the king remained unaware of the growing movement against him. He continued to hold court, his mind consumed with the idea that Vela was simply a daughter returning home, wanting to reclaim her title. But what he didn't understand was that Vela had returned not as a child, but as a leader, one who would not be silenced. The day of reckoning came sooner than the king expected. Vela and her growing army of supporters marched toward the palace gates, ready to confront her father and take back what was rightfully hers. She knew that this would not be an easy battle. Her father was powerful, and the kingdom had been under his rule for so long. But Vela also knew that the time for fear had passed. The kingdom was ready for change, and she would be the one to lead it. Jonathan stood beside her, his face set with determination. He had never imagined that his journey would bring him to this moment, standing beside an alien princess, ready to fight for the future of an entire kingdom. But in that moment, he knew there was no turning back. Vela had given him a purpose, and he would see this through to the end. As the gates of the palace loomed in front of them, Vela turned to Jonathan. "This is it. No matter what happens, we do this together." Jonathan smiled, his eyes full of unwavering support. "Together," he said, "let's take back your kingdom." And with that, they marched forward, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them inside the palace walls. The heavy iron doors of the palace loomed in front of Vela and her supporters. The atmosphere was tense, each step bringing them closer to the moment that would change everything. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the royal courtyard. And in the distance, the sounds of distant horns echoed through the air. The kingdom had been on the edge of war for so long that it felt like nothing could prevent the inevitable clash. But for Vela, this was more than just a battle for the throne. It was a fight for justice, for her people, and for the future of the galaxy. Inside the palace, the king had been informed of the approaching march. His advisors and generals were already preparing for the confrontation, unsure of what to expect. They had long feared that Vela's return would bring chaos, but they had never imagined it would come to this. Vela's army was smaller than the king's, but it was stronger in spirit. The soldiers who stood with her were loyal to the cause, driven by the promise of a new era. They had seen the suffering caused by the king's rule, and they were ready to fight for a chance at something better. Jonathan stood at Vela's side, his presence a reminder of the bond they shared. He had never been a soldier, but in this moment, he was more than just a human from a distant world. He was a part of her story, her strength. As they approached the throne room, Vela's heart raced. She had spent years planning for this moment, and now it was finally here. She had come to reclaim what was hers, but she had also come to confront the man who had betrayed her, the man who had used her as a pawn in his power games. The king's actions had left scars on the kingdom, scars that would take years to heal. But Vela was determined to start the healing process, no matter the cost. The palace hallways were quiet, but Vela could feel the weight of history bearing down on her. She had grown up here, trained to become a ruler, groomed for the throne. But now she was not the same princess who had left for war. She had seen the harsh realities of the galaxy, had fought for her survival, and had learned what true leadership meant. She was ready to be the ruler her kingdom needed. As they reached the throne room, the massive doors swung open. The king sat at his throne, his face a mask of authority. His advisors and guards flanked him, ready to defend their ruler at all costs. The moment Vela stepped into the room, the tension in the air became palpable. The king's eyes narrowed as he saw his daughter, standing tall and confident, with a human by her side. "You return, and you bring chaos with you," the king's voice boomed, his tone sharp and cold. "You have no place here, Vela. You have no right to challenge me." Vela took a deep breath, her voice steady as she replied, "I have every right. You betrayed me, Father. You betrayed the kingdom and its people. You sent me to die, and now you expect me to stand by and watch you destroy everything." The king's face hardened, his eyes flashing with anger. "You know nothing of what I've done to keep this empire intact. Everything I did was for the greater good." "No," Vela said, her voice rising. "Everything you did was for your own power. You sacrificed me and the people of this kingdom for your own gain. But I won't let it continue. I won't let you destroy us any longer." The king stood from his throne, his eyes full of fury. "You are my daughter, but you are a fool if you think I will let you take what is mine." The room fell silent as father and daughter faced each other, the weight of their words hanging in the air. For the first time, Vela realized that this wasn't just a battle for the throne. It was a battle for their very souls. The king had been consumed by power, and in his obsession, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Vela wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her people, for a kingdom that had been broken by a ruler who had forgotten the meaning of leadership. Jonathan stepped forward, standing beside Vela. "We're not backing down, Your Majesty. Your rule ends today." The king's eyes flicked to Jonathan, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate. But then his expression hardened once more. "Then prepare for battle. If you want my throne, you'll have to take it." Vela's heart pounded, but her resolve was unshakable. She had come too far to turn back now. The battle for her kingdom, for her people, was about to begin. She would face whatever came next, knowing that this fight was more than just about power. It was about creating a future where no one would have to suffer at the hands of a ruler like her father. The royal palace, once a symbol of power and stability, had now become the battleground for the future of the kingdom. Inside its grand halls, tension hung in the air like a heavy fog. Vela stood at the front of her small army, Jonathan by her side, as they faced off against the king's forces. The sound of armored boots echoed through the palace, and the sharp clink of swords being drawn filled the silence. It was the beginning of a fight that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Vela's heart beat steadily as she looked around. Her supporters, those who had pledged their loyalty to her, stood ready. Though their numbers were fewer than the king's, they were strong, determined, and united by one common goal: to end the reign of a man who had caused so much suffering. These were not just soldiers, they were people who had been broken by the king's rule and were now ready to rise. Jonathan stood beside her, his face grim but filled with quiet resolve. He had never expected to be in the middle of a war, especially not on an alien planet. But since meeting Vela, his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. He had seen the cruelty of the king, the pain in Vela's eyes, and now he understood the importance of this battle. It was not just about Vela taking the throne. It was about freeing the people of the kingdom from tyranny. As the two sides prepared for battle, Vela felt a surge of energy within her. The king's soldiers, loyal to him and terrified of what would happen if they failed, stood with swords drawn. Vela knew that many of them had been forced into service, just as her own people had been. It wasn't just the king who was guilty. The entire system had failed the people. But today, it would all change. "Remember why you fight," Vela whispered to her troops, her voice calm yet full of power. "We fight for freedom. We fight for a future where we all have a chance to live without fear. Let's show them what true strength looks like." The battle began with a clash of steel, the sound of swords meeting shields ringing out through the halls. Vela fought with fierce precision, her movements swift and sure. Jonathan, though not trained as a soldier, stood by her side, his courage never faltering. He wasn't just fighting for Vela anymore. He was fighting for the people, for the future they all hoped to build. As the fight raged on, Vela's mind remained focused on her ultimate goal, the king. She had to defeat him, not just as a ruler, but as the man who had wronged her, her people, and her kingdom. She could feel his presence in the palace, lurking behind the soldiers, watching from the safety of his throne. He would not stay hidden for long. The time was near. After what seemed like hours, the final push came. Vela's forces, though fewer in number, had managed to push through the king's defenses, their unity and determination stronger than anything the king's army could offer. With a final surge of energy, Vela's army broke through to the royal chambers, the heart of the palace. Vela stepped forward, her eyes set on her father, who stood at the far end of the room, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. "It's over, father," she said, her voice ringing through the room. "Your reign ends today." The king's face flushed with rage, but beneath it there was a hint of fear. He had always believed that no one would dare challenge him. But now, standing before his daughter and the people who had once served him, he saw the truth. His time was up. "You have no idea what you've done, Vela," the king spat, his voice shaking. "You think you can just tear down everything I've built. You're a fool." Vela stood tall, her expression unwavering. "I'm not tearing anything down, father. I'm rebuilding it. You built a kingdom on lies and fear. I'm going to build one on truth and freedom." The king's eyes darkened, but he said nothing more. He knew, deep down, that Vela was right. His time as ruler had come to an end. The empire he had built would crumble, and the kingdom would rise again, this time under the rule of a leader who truly cared for her people. As Vela looked around at her supporters, she felt a sense of pride swell within her. This was just the beginning. The fight for freedom had been won, but the real work was only just starting. The people of the kingdom would need time to heal, to rebuild, and to find their place in this new world. But for the first time in a long while, Vela felt hopeful. She had done what many thought was impossible. She had taken back her kingdom. And together with Jonathan and her loyal allies, they would create a future where everyone had a voice. The battle was over. The king had been dethroned, and Vela stood in the heart of the royal palace, looking out over the city that would soon be hers to lead. The echoes of battle had faded, leaving only the quiet hum of a new dawn. The palace was filled with the sounds of people, her people, coming together after years of fear, oppression, and silence. Vela took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt free. Her father, the man who had ruled with cruelty and deception, was now a prisoner in his own palace. Vela had not wanted to destroy him, but the truth had left no other choice. She had fought for her kingdom, for the people who had suffered for far too long. Now she could finally begin the work of healing. Jonathan stood beside her, his presence a steady comfort in the midst of the change. He had been there from the very beginning, helping her when no one else could. The human who had once been a stranger in a galaxy far from his own home had become a key part of her journey. He had stood by her when things seemed impossible, and now, as the palace settled into a new kind of peace, he was there to witness the beginning of a new era. "I didn't expect any of this," Jonathan said, his voice low as he looked out over the city. "I never imagined I'd be here, in the heart of a kingdom, watching a revolution unfold." Vela smiled, though her smile was tired. "Neither did I," she admitted. "But we did it. You and I. We did it together." Together. The word carried more weight than she realized. She had always been alone in her fight, but now, with Jonathan by her side, she knew that the future didn't have to be a solitary path. They had built something together, something that would last beyond their own time. The city below them was already beginning to change. People were returning to their homes, walking freely in the streets, no longer afraid to speak their minds or stand up for what they believed in. It was a sight Vela never thought she would see. A kingdom united, no longer divided by fear or power-hungry rulers. "I think it's time for a new beginning," Vela said softly. "For everyone." Jonathan looked at her, understanding the weight of her words. "What do you mean?" Vela turned to face him, her eyes bright with determination. "The kingdom needs a new kind of leadership, not one built on power or control, but on trust and equality. I will lead, but not as a ruler who controls. I will lead as a guide, helping our people rebuild, helping them find their voice." Jonathan nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "You'll be a great leader." Vela felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding a kingdom that had been shattered by years of war and misrule would take time. But she was no longer alone. She had the support of her people, and she had Jonathan, who had become more than just an ally. He had become her partner in every sense of the word. As the sun set over the palace, casting a warm golden glow over the city, Vela knew that the hardest part of the journey was over. The king's reign had ended, and with it, the darkness that had held her kingdom in its grip for so long. Now it was time to move forward, to build a future where every voice mattered, where no one would be sacrificed for the sake of power. Vela took Jonathan's hand, feeling the weight of their shared journey. "We've won," she said quietly, "but this is just the beginning." And together, they would lead the kingdom into a new era, one where freedom and unity would be the foundation of a brighter future.